hard stop at 4 because we have multiple meetings. So if you want to, if you're not able to get everything in, you can send us something to post on our website.
But not read.
Read.
Uh,
So we have 15 minutes if you want to introduce yourself and tell us what you'd like us to know.
yes, Stephen Whitaker with BH, and I'm a government accountability advocate in transparency and technology. I've been involved in 911 since before Tom was appointed to the board. I served on some of the subcommittees to create the 911 system. Even got arrested for going to a meeting of the board. And dear Sally Fox, may she rest in peace, said, I'm not going to any meeting they're not letting you into. So, Stephen Whitaker for the record from Montpelier. I believe my prepared comments will use most of the 15 minutes, but I would ask folks to jot down their questions so that I don't get cut off before. Thank you for inviting me to speak about some important issues around public safety communications and planning. Several of the issues that I'm going to raise are not specific to public safety, but are within the jurisdiction of this committee, specifically interagency planning and public records issues that are impediments to the regional dispatch. I first want to commend Commissioner Morrison for her candor in acknowledging that she and the department might be on the wrong track with their intended disbursement of the 11 million that the legislature appropriated last year. The request for proposals that was issued by the department last fall, the entire process was a fiasco. Unreasonable response time, as you heard from Tom Hanley, lack of adherence to Administrative Bulletin 3.0 related to grants, lack of compliance with the Department of Public Safety's own documented grants plan. And this is included in a memo that Kim Cheney, our former Attorney General, who was sitting here earlier, had prepared around the time. The proposal review process was somewhat rigged. Members of the review committee were only allowed to shuffle a few dollars among proposals, but not to dig into the details of whether any of the proposals truly met the specific requirements of the RFP. That should be a red flag, that in effect, somebody is intent on handing this money out regardless of the requirements of the RFP. I characterize the grant program as in effect throwing money against the wall to see what sticks towards an ill-defined strategy to relieve the Department of Public Safety of dispatch obligations that they have sustained over the years and are now more of a challenge to fulfill. Public safety is a fundamental obligation of the state, full stop. To the degree that the state or the legislature delegates powers and duties to municipalities or to regional authorities, the fallback is still to the state in the event that those regions or those towns are unable to fulfill their obligations. So I recommend fundamentally that the 11 million, of which all of it really remains uncommitted, be thoughtfully redirected in accordance with what you've heard from other witnesses and what I'll share with you today. A few notes about transparency and capacity. The Department of Public Safety's Chief of Radio Technology Services Group, Terry LaValle, did speak to the Regional Dispatch Work Group. He admitted that we don't know where the dead zones are, and we need a complete inventory of existing radio systems and components. He had retired more than a year ago from state government after a career spanning many years, even decades. And the department has been unable to find a replacement for him, so they've hired him back on a consulting contracting basis. But he also serves as the statewide interoperability coordinator and the single point of contact for the FirstNet. Those two roles need to be a state employee person, so it's time to think about reassigning those to possibly Barb Neal or someone under her staff. But this is going to be a rapid evolution, and I just want to plant that idea. As to the department's transparency, since last June 21st, the department has obstructed a public records request from me for the contents of a SharePoint file collected by the precursor entity to the Regional Dispatch Work Group. So Commissioner Shirley pulled together folks to decide how they were going to proceed, and that included our police chief from Montpelier. That's where this language about regional governance, participatory governance, representative governance, or contracts or MOUs came from, because Montpelier thought it could slide through on the contracts or MOUs. In fact, I believe our city council's taking up an MOU at their next meeting. With regard to the legislatively chartered regional dispatch work group process, its strengths and its weaknesses of the product, the department clearly did not provide the administrative support as was required by law. Now I'm talking about government GovOps functionality. The appropriations bill clearly said administrative support to the work group will be public safety staff. They put Mandy and Lance, but they also specifically said you will collect the existing fees being paid by all Vermont municipalities and agencies and compile that and then project that forward under the new model. Well, one, there was no new model to project forward. You heard that from Paul White. And two, they said it's too complicated. The DPS staff said it's too complicated to collect the fees. So I spent untold hours and several months collecting it myself. And I almost got a complete data set. It took repeated requests and follow-up phone calls and sometimes public records requests and sometimes appeals. I finally got all of the fees charged to all Vermont municipalities and agencies from all but the self-dispatch towns, meaning the big Chittenden County towns that do their own. I couldn't reach somebody to give me a real number for those. And for a few Middlebury central dispatch. That interesting example, I'm going to get off script, but I'll skip it next time. They are a nonprofit performing an essential government function, not subject to public records law. First, she said she'd give me the data, then she changed her mind, then she says we're not subject to public records law. And so it raises the question of if things go wrong on a public safety dispatch, they're under no obligation to maintain records. They're not according to a records retention schedule, they're under no obligation to produce records for records requests. It's dangerous to have non-instrumentalities handling essential public safety records. They also can't do law enforcement dispatching because they can't get the security clearance to work with law enforcement records. They also have a grant application. I've reviewed all the grant applications that came in. Not a single one of them met the requirements for representative governance on a board and commitments, documented commitments of ongoing operational funding. So the work group report falls short. It falls far short of what was requested, but it does serve as a good foundation to describe the lay of the land, the strengths and weaknesses of our current dispatch architecture. What should the 11 million that was appropriated by last year's General Assembly be spent on? What would it be best spent on? Clearly, none of the proposals that were submitted, none of those, okay, I skipped over, I already ad-libbed that. We have an opportunity here to spend the money wisely and lay a foundation for the coming decade worth of investment in upgrading, modernizing our dispatch infrastructure, including cellular communications. I'll pause there and mention that public safety, even more so than many of the firemen understand, is fundamentally reliant on broadband tools, data from cellular technology. And many of the public safety officials also think that's out of our hands. It's not out of our hands. It will in effect be our obligation to fill the dead zones in cellular in a neutral host model. So when you have a mutual aid response and people coming from a town where AT&T was the good provider, and people coming from a town where Verizon was the good provider, and people coming from a town where T-Mobile, all three of their phones should have priority and preemption on whatever cells are in that area. And I have detailed knowledge on how to accomplish that I won't go on for an hour about.
Thank you.
No, I just compared myself to Barb. My expertise complements her. It's hers, it's different. So we lay the foundation for the coming decades, upgrading both public safety infrastructure and cellular for the public and to protect our first responders. But this will require careful integrated planning among several disciplines, the broadband initiatives of state government, which are not being built to public safety grade, the public safety communications, LMR, LTE, wireless and mobile wireless cell design. In summary, it's my informed opinion that the department lacks the capacity, lacks a plan, lacks the vision or the personnel to coordinate, solicit, and review proposals. The municipalities and the regions lack the governance. They also lack the capacity to develop those plans at this time. Those standards for what is to be contained in a regional plan and what engineering must be included with those plans to qualify for state funding should be set by the state. And I have proposed remodeling the 911 board with those tasks and obligations, and should be set uniform statewide. There are tools provided by the federal government. There's guidance on how to form statewide governance. There's guidance, specific guidance on how to form regional governance and for what goes into a regional interoperable communications plan. I have those documents from the Federal Homeland Security sub-agency. There's a software tool called CASM, spelled CASM, that supports inventorying of existing infrastructure, radio towers, generators, equipment, cages, backhaul, electrical grounding, all the components of communications infrastructure that needs to be inventoried statewide in order to provide a foundation for designing an incremental strategy to upgrade the communications capacity to design failover among dispatch centers and public safety answering points, to prioritize where the fiber should be built in coordination with the broadband board's efforts and the communications union districts, to evaluate where fiber should be put underground in anticipation of storms to assure continuity of radio transmissions from essential towers during severe weather events. So some towers will be evaluated, and it's going to be worth the extra money to make sure that a tree can't take that connection down. In a nutshell, the $11 million appropriated last year, the $9 million in additional funds secured from Congress, congressionally directed spending by Senator Leahy, provides Vermont with a $20 million head start, but only if we spend it wisely. How should we spend it? That amount of money should provide baseline information for the entire state, inventory of all the regional communications infrastructure, the state's communications infrastructure, the backhaul capacity, even some cellular design for the dead zones. We need to identify the dead zones for both LMR, land mobile radio, and for LTE cellular. To inventory the equipment, we need to convene regional governance. Terry, I'm going off script, Terry mentioned that the reason we abandoned CASM, that software tool, back in about 2008, was because the expertise was lacking in the forces of people collecting the information. So garbage in, garbage out. It was better to not collect it than to collect information we couldn't rely on. So we should prioritize efforts around Rutland County and Addison County, where we would gain the most bang for the buck in relieving, dispatching, and call answering load from the Department of Public Safety. There's 25, 30 agencies right around Rutland, and there's completely unserved agencies in Addison County. You could design 2 countywide systems designed to fail over to each other with and prototype all the procedures and documents and policies and engineering that would serve the rest of the state once we get there. And that would be the most bang for the buck and probably could be accomplished within that 11 million, leaving next year's legislature to prioritize with the 9 million. This is clearly the department's highest priority and can be accommodated best by focusing on those two areas where most municipalities are relying on the state police. 2Ps, I've already said that. To document the standards and procedures, including the governance that are to be expected on all other systems statewide. You've got great support from Senators Callamore and Williams as well on that. And you've got a great asset in Tom Hanlon. This can all be accomplished within the 11 million as well as statewide inventories if we're smart about it. The key is integrated planning to make the most of the hundreds of millions now being invested in fiber broadband. The IIJA funds for electric grid resilience, transportation funds for highway communications safety. I just spoke to Joe Flynn about that today, which requires cell coverage someday to support autonomous vehicles. There's big money for telehealth and distance education. None of this has been integrated by anybody in state government. And that is what needs to happen. That's a GovOps issue. All require detailed design and all to some degree can be accomplished more leveraging our accomplishments when planning in concert with others. This other note relates to workforce. We have a problem with workforce.
We're starting to pack up because we have other meetings, so.
And I've already run my 15 minutes.
Yeah, if you want to submit those, Steve, and if you have hard copies to give me, that would be helpful.
Well, Kim left, as far as what happened in Central Vermont, Kim
Yeah.
left his paper, which he just wrote. and
Okay.
Is Kim the older
Kim
chap
Cheney.
who was here?
Kim Cheney,
Yeah.
he used to be our Attorney General, Washington County State's Attorney. He was Chair of the Central Vermont Public Safety Authority. He knows, and he's very candid about what's going on.
Is he gonna come with us?
He was recommended by Jen, but he did not get invited. I also need to note that 2 of the members who were scheduled early on this never got an invitation, and therefore they didn't show up.
You are not involved in our scheduling, Mr. Whitaker, so.
Well, I'm
If you
just,
want to leave the documents, and if you want to submit things, we can post them on the web, the 2 things, not multiple things, just your testimony would be really helpful to have on our website.
well, these are good to read. These will help you understand what you're dealing with.
Great.
And I made enough copies for all of you, so.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for your time today. And,
Oh, here's a map you can look at, but you can't have. And that is better than Barb's map. You pass it around and come on,
And,
see what, want to make more time?
all right, well, thank you so much.
Yep.
And I'm sure we will definitely